The tea in your porcelain cup is exactly 65 degrees Celsius. You know this because you have timed the kettle's whistle against the walk from the kitchen of your country estate. It is a Tuesday morning in 1915, and the world is supposed to be quiet. You are an officer of the Old Guard, a man of horse and saber, currently serving in a secondary capacity that allows for brisk morning walks and the reading of the Times. You are adjusted to the rhythm of a career that was supposed to end in a comfortable retirement. Then the heavy oak door of your study opens without a knock. The courier stands there, his uniform splattered with the mud of a world you haven't yet touched. He doesn't salute, he simply hands you a leather-bound folder embossed with the seal of the War Office. You set the tea down. The steam rises in a thin, mocking line. You open the folder and read the single page inside. Sir John French has been removed. The king and the cabinet have reached a consensus. You are no longer a spectator or a subordinate. You are the commander-in-chief of the British Expeditionary Force. You are now responsible for the lives of 2 million men and the survival of the British Empire. The transition is instantaneous and violent. There is no training for the sensation of the earth shifting beneath your feet. By noon, you are in a black staff car racing toward the coast. The quiet of the countryside is replaced by the roar of the cross-channel ferry and the frantic clicking of telegraph machines. You enter the general headquarters, GHQ, at Saint-Omer, France. The air here doesn't smell like cedar or tea. It smells of wet wool, cheap cigarettes, and the metallic tang of bureaucratic anxiety. You walk past maps that stretch across entire walls, pinned with colored yarn that represents thousands of souls, currently shivering in the mud of the Ypres salient. The room goes silent when they say your name. Every eye in the room is looking for a savior, or at least a man who knows what to do next. You realize, with a cold jolt in your chest, that you are that man. You have entered the high-stakes world of total war, and the exit has been bricked up behind you. Your first week is a blur of logistical nightmares. You discover that the army you inherited is an industrial machine that is dangerously low on fuel. You sit at a heavy oak desk littered with reports on shell shortages. You are told that for every 10 shells the Germans fire, your batteries can only afford to send back 2. This is not a matter of courage. It is a matter of manufacturing. You make your first major decision. You bypass the traditional chain of command and send a private, blistering letter to the politicians in London. You demand a ministry of munitions. You threaten to resign before you've even settled into the role. It is a gamble. If they refuse, your career is over in 10 days. If they agree, you have just declared war on your own government's slow pace. The response comes 48 hours later. Lloyd George is appointed to oversee the factories. You have won your first battle, but the price is the permanent enmity of the men who hold the purse strings. You learn the first hidden rule of the system. The enemy in the opposite trench is predictable, but the allies in your own capital are treacherous. You adapt. You begin to keep a private diary, documenting every conversation, every promise made, and every slight received. You are no longer just a general. You are a political operator. By early 1916, the pressure shifts from shells to flesh. The French are being pulverized at Verdun. Their commander, Joffre, visits you at GHQ. He is a large man who breathes heavily and smells of garlic and desperation. He tells you that the French army will break if the British do not launch a massive diversionary offensive. You look at your maps. The sector he suggests is the Somme. It is a place of rolling hills and chalky soil, perfectly suited for German defense. Your own subordinates advise caution. Your heart tells you your men aren't ready. But the geopolitical reality is a vice. If France falls, the war is lost. You sign the orders for the summer offensive. You authorize the expenditure of 500,000 men as a calculated wastage. The word wastage tastes like ash in your mouth. You rationalize it by staring at the casualty projections until the numbers stop looking like people and start looking like ink. You tell yourself that a short, sharp blow will save lives in the long run. You are learning to think in years, not days. You are learning that your soul is the currency you must spend to buy a victory. July 1st arrives. You wake at 5 a.m. and pray. You have done everything possible. You have amassed the largest concentration of artillery in human history. You have told the men that they can simply walk across no man's land because nothing could survive the barrage. You sit in your office, waiting for the telegraph to hum with news of the breakthrough. The first reports are fragments of horror, heavy resistance, wire not cut, communications lost. By noon, the fragments become a mosaic of catastrophe. You walk to the map room. The pins aren't moving forward. They are being pulled back. By evening, the numbers begin to settle into the ledger. 60,000 casualties in a single day. 20,000 of them are dead. This is more than the British Army has lost in any decade of its existence. The weight of it hits you in the quiet of midnight. You stand by the window, looking toward the distant horizon where the flashes of guns illuminate the clouds. You expect to feel a crushing guilt, but instead you feel a terrifying, icy resolve. If you stop now, Those 20,000 died for nothing. If you continue, you might justify their sacrifice. You make the hardest decision of your life. You order the attacks to continue the next morning, and the morning after that. You have transitioned from a commander into a gambler who cannot afford to leave the table. Months pass. The Somme becomes a name for a graveyard that never fills up. You move your headquarters closer to the front, as if the proximity to the mud will somehow sharpen your judgment. You are now the most criticized man in the British Empire. The newspapers call you a butcher. The politicians in London are whispering about a replacement. You handle the pressure by becoming more rigid. You insist on polished boots and perfect salutes. You create a shell of discipline around yourself to keep the chaos of the front from seeping into your mind. You learn to navigate the shifting loyalties of the high command. You realize that your chief of staff is leaking information to your rivals. You don't fire him. You overwhelm him with meaningless paperwork and isolate him from the decision-making process. You are learning to wield power like a scalpel. You find that you trust fewer people every day. Your identity is shifting. The man who loved his country estate is being replaced by a ghost who lives only for the tactical breakthrough. 1917 brings the mud of Passchendaele. The rains are biblical. You watch through a telescope as your tanks, the new technology you pinned your hopes on, sink into the swamp. You see men drowning in shell holes filled with liquid clay. Your commanders on the ground beg you to halt, but the Russian Empire is collapsing. The Americans haven't arrived in force. If you don't keep the Germans occupied here, they will pivot their entire weight to the French front and end the war before Christmas. You stay the course. You tell yourself that the German army is also bleeding. It is a war of attrition, a gruesome mathematical equation where the winner is the one who has one man left standing when the other has zero. You sit at your desk and calculate the kill ratios. You find yourself hoping for a high body count on the other side more than a low one on your own. It is a psychological rot that you recognize but cannot stop. You are no longer fighting for glory. You are fighting for a slightly more favorable statistic. The stress manifests in physical ways. Your hair turns white. Your hands tremble when you aren't holding a pen. You suffer from bouts of insomnia where you see the faces of the colonels you sent into the woods of Delville. You rationalize your decisions as divine will. You begin to believe that God has chosen you to bear this cross because no one else is strong enough to be this hated. It is a dangerous thought, but it is the only one that allows you to sleep. The true test comes in March 1918. The Germans, reinforced by divisions from the now-defunct Russian front, launch a massive, desperate gamble. They call it the Michael Offensive. The British line, your line, snaps. In 48 hours, you lose all the ground you spent 2 years and 1 million lives to gain. The retreat is a chaotic scramble toward the sea. You are in the map room at 3 a.m. The pins are moving backwards so fast the clerks can't keep up. The French are preparing to retreat toward Paris, leaving your flank exposed. For the first time, you face the reality of total defeat. If the Germans reach the Channel ports, the British army will be driven into the sea, and the empire will fall. The pressure is no longer a weight. It is a vacuum, sucking the air from your lungs. You could blame your subordinates. You could blame the French. You could ask London for permission to surrender. Instead, you take a piece of plain paper and write the most famous words of your life. With our backs to the wall, and believing in the justice of our cause, each one of us must fight on to the end. The safety of our homes and the freedom of mankind alike depend upon the conduct of each one of us at this critical moment. You issue the backs-to-the-wall order. You're telling your men to die where they stand. It is the ultimate exercise of power. The demand for a collective suicide to buy a few more hours of time. You spend the next 72 hours without sleep, moving from division to division. You aren't giving tactical orders anymore. You're projecting a calm, unbreakable will. You are the anchor. If you show a second of doubt, the entire front will dissolve into a panicked mob. The line holds barely. The German momentum falters against the sheer stubbornness of men who have been told there is nowhere left to run. You have survived the storm. You are not the same man who stood in that study in 1915. You have seen the worst that humanity can do to itself, and you were the one who authorized the logistics for it. By the summer of 1918, the tide finally turns. The Americans are arriving by the hundreds of thousands. The British tanks are finally working in coordination with the infantry. You launch the 100 Days Offensive. This time, the pins move forward. You capture thousands of prisoners. You see the German army, once the most feared force on earth, begin to crumble. You should feel a sense of triumph. You should be planning a victory parade. But as you walk through the liberated towns, you see only the ruins. You see the forests that have been turned into splinters and the fields that will be toxic for a century. You realize that your victory is being built on a foundation of bone. The politicians in London are suddenly your best friends again. They send telegrams of congratulation. They talk about titles and estates and statues. You read their words with a profound sense of detachment. They weren't there for the nights at Passchendaele. They didn't sign the wastage reports. You realize that they will use your victory to justify the next war, and the one after that. The system is already resetting itself, preparing for a future that has learned nothing from the past. The armistice is signed on a cold November morning. The guns stop at 11 a.m. The silence is more terrifying than the noise ever was. It is a heavy, ringing void, that forces you to hear your own heartbeat. You sit in your office at GHQ, the map room empty for the first time in years. You have won. You have saved the empire. But as you look at the final casualty lists, nearly 1 million British dead under your command, you feel no joy. You feel only a sense of unfinished business. You think about the men coming home. They are not the same men who left. They are broken, gassed, and haunted. You realize that your responsibility didn't end with the ceasefire. The consequences of your decisions will echo through the streets of London and the villages of the north for generations. You are expected to lead the victory march through London. You imagine yourself on a white horse, the crowds cheering, the king waiting at the end of the mall. You know you will play the part. You will wear the medals and give the speeches. You will accept the earldom and the £500,000 the government grants you as a reward. But you also know that for the rest of your life, every time you close your eyes, you will see the chalky soil of the Somme. You begin to spend your private time and your own money on the creation of the British Legion. You focus on the welfare of the veterans. It is your penance. You're trying to buy back a fraction of your soul by ensuring the men you used as a capital are not discarded like trash. It is a quiet, desperate battle against a government that wants to forget the cost of its survival. The power you accumulated is still there, but it has changed shape. You are no longer a commander of divisions. You are a symbol of a generation's trauma. People look at you and see the man who won the war, or they see the man who killed their sons. There is no middle ground. You live in a state of permanent, high-stakes isolation. One evening, years after the war has ended, you are sitting in your study, much like you were on that Tuesday in 1915. A cup of tea sits on the desk. You are reading a report on the rising tensions in Europe, the new ideologies taking root in the ruins of the empires you helped topple. The shadows in the corner of the room seem to move, taking the shape of men in tin hats. You realize that the war never truly ended for you. The system didn't let you leave, it just changed the scenery. The responsibility you took on that day the courier arrived is a permanent stain. You are the head of an army that no longer exists, guarding a peace that feels increasingly fragile. You look at your hands, the hands that signed the orders for 1 million deaths, and you realize they will never be clean no matter how much good you do for the survivors. The telephone on your desk rings. It is a sharp, demanding sound that cuts through the silence of the house. You know that voice on the other end will be another official, another politician, another man asking for your influence, your name, your judgment. You realize that the stakes are still high and the consequences are still escalating. The role continues. You reach for the receiver. You don't hesitate. You have learned that the only thing worse than the burden of command is the silence that follows when no one is left to lead. You are the last of the old guard, a ghost in a suit, still standing at your post because you have forgotten how to do anything else. The voice on the line is urgent. There is trouble in the East. There are decisions to be made about the new borders. They need your expertise. They need the man who isn't afraid of the numbers. You listen. Your eyes fixed on the empty teacup. You begin to speak, your voice calm and cold, the voice of a man who has already paid the ultimate price and has nothing left to lose.